Welcome back to Tabula Rasa. This is our comic book review. Based off of these 5 categories, I'm going to give it either a star, or if I really like it, a star plus. A combination of 5 stars or pluses means I recommend it. More than 5 just simply tells you how much I like the book. Do the YouTube thing, feed the algorithm, and here we go. A Comixology original line of exclusive content from well-known names of the industry like Snyder and Greg Capullo. This horror action-adventure comic book may be the beginning of a renaissance of Western comics. Maybe. Well, let's take a look. We have comics written by Snyder, art by Greg Capullo, inks by Jonathan Glapion, colored by Dave McCaig, lettered by Tom Napolitano, edited by Will Dennis, published by Comixology and Best Jackett Press. If you do enjoy this sort of content, feed the algorithm for YouTube, and here we go. First category, black and white and color. This is a colored comic, and the art is pretty much top-notch. There isn't much here to critique or say. It's a nice throwback to the earlier style of comics, the 90s style. The design is neat enough, but this may be a controversial statement, but I don't think there's enough here that gives this comic that, pizzazz. Though I think that might be a theme for this review. So this gets only a star. Panels and expression. The panels do have play. So we have that. The expression of the characters, it does fall flat at some parts. I'm not 100% sure why. It could be that the main character's facial expressions are a bit too subtle, to say at the very least. Like for me, it feels like you only see like 5 faces, and most of it falls on like her default face. It could just be my impression, but either way, I can't give this more than a star. Character and dialogue. Unnamed protagonists aren't a bad thing, but in this case, having a named protagonist would have been very helpful. I think her name is Faith, but it is a little bit ambiguous since nobody calls her by her name, like throughout the story at all. Design is good enough. The dialogue is functional. Um, you certainly do get a personality within the exposition, whether or not it is a personality, up to the reader, I suppose. I think she's supposed to be some sort of smart person, and she's supposed to be a nice person, but beyond that, I didn't really get much. Like before I said, this doesn't really have that pizzazz for me, so I'm just going to give it this a star. Theme and execution. From the get-go, we have the issues between faith, the angels and demons part, and something there about science. There's also that play on the word faith between the faith in one's religion versus the faith in people and loved ones. And, of course, there's a whole demons within versus actual demons as well. And to be honest, I think it has failed on these points, simply because it moves too quickly to even begin to set things up, much less give you time on the whole character versus the story. So yeah, I cannot give this a star here, so no stars. Plot and execution. The plot moves fast, and it is interrupted by these narrative exposition dumps. Now, this is kind of the norm for most American comics. In this one, there is hardly a panel in which there isn't a text accompaniment, much less a lot of text accompaniment. So we have a lot of exposition to go through at the beginning of the story about the character, and then there's a lot of exposition about the beginning of the world and the fall of man, and then there's just a lot of dialogue in between. So it makes this book seem busy or crowded, and that's why I'm not giving it a star here. It just jumps around too much for my own liking, much less something for like an origin story slash first issue adventure. So, no stars. Conclusion. This book lacks pizzazz. The art is good enough. The story is meh. Some people might enjoy it, but at 3 stars, I'm not going to recommend it to anybody. I mean, if you're curious enough, take a look. It is on Comixology, not sponsored, by the way. Original series, so some of you won't even have to spend money to read the book. But in a medium in which horror and action adventure are very much a part of a very crowded field, this is something that doesn't really stand out. I mean, the in-store description name drops DC Comics and Batman for a reason. It sets up this expectation, which is A, hard to live up to, or B, for some people, it's going to be hard to go past, right? Especially when you consider the recent set of controversies that have been surrounding the comic book industry for the past 2 decades, especially for the big two. You know, part of the problem, I think, is that half of this book, this comic, could have been saved for a different issue for world building, right? Instead of trying to put everything, the world building, the character introduction, the character development, all of it within the first 38 pages, because that is a lot. You know, it'd be better if they didn't, right? The exposition, we really didn't need it. There's this big thing in there about her having a prosthetic arm that gets replaced with another prosthetic arm that has a demon-slaying blade in it. Cool idea. It's great. But, you know, did we really need the thing where the backstory on that, right? Especially for this first issue? Probably not. You know, there's this thing in there where the main character is testing these god folk with an axe. You know, again, it's nice, but, you know, there's just so much backstory that went into it. It's like, did we really even need that, right? You know, the whole show, don't tell kind of thing. And the religious themes in here are very poorly inspired. If you took a surface level understanding of religion and tried to apply it in storytelling, this is what you would get. But because religion and reality in general is more complicated and nuanced, this is just surface level. You know, there are demons, there are this, there's that. There's nothing really more to it unless you put in more into it. It's not really in the writing, to say at the very least. So it just rings hollow. Now, I think that if you made a story that checked the boxes, this kind of feels like that. I mean, what do people like? Demon slaying, right? Check that box, because it's popular, right? You know, they like horror. There we go. They like action. There we go. Well, here is another demon slaying comic, right? Amongst many others, such as Spawn, Demon Slayer. There is a US version, Vampirella, Demon Slayer, the manga, right? You know, this field isn't exactly short full of people, right? Or comics, I should say. It's a very much a go-to subject for comics. You know, everything pretty much has demons in it eventually, right? And the action is very much scant. You get the biggest part at the end, and that's kind of about it, right? A lot of exposition beforehand, though. I think the biggest mistake that this book made wasn't going all in on either the horror elements or the action adventure elements, right? You know, you can have horror go horror, right? And it'll have action and adventure elements with it. You can go full action adventure and you can have horror elements added to it, right? But because it didn't commit to one thing, it just falls halfway for both. And for this first issue, it's not great. I mean, for a first issue, at the very least, you should have a nice adventure with the beginning, middle, and end that gives us an idea of what we are to expect. You know, you can always fill up the lore later. You don't have to tell us everything right at the very beginning, right? But who knows? Maybe I'm totally wrong and this is going to be a huge success and I, you know, made a terrible prediction. But considering that no one's really talking about this, at least not that I've seen, you know, no news outlet or something on Twitter, kind of hard to say, but you never know. So, in the end, can't really recommend this for only 3 stars. Thank you for watching the entire video. I do appreciate it if you do make it this far. Please do the YouTube thing, beat the algorithm. I hope you are having a good day or good evening. Ciao, everybody.